Thanks for listening today. I want to be transparent with you. Besides hosting this podcast, I also work for Everly Health, our sponsor for today's episode. However, all views and opinions expressed on the podcast are my own or those of my guests, not those of Everly Health. Welcome back to Digital MD, a podcast where we talk to leaders in the digital healthcare ecosystem about innovation, decision making, and how they think. I'm your host, Dr. Liz Kuo, and today I'm thrilled to have Vinay. So Vinay, he is the co-founder and CEO of Bonfire Analytics, an AI-driven sales intelligence platform for health tech companies, selling it to providers and plans. And he previously worked at large medical device companies like Stryker and growth stage digital health companies. He has a background in mechanical and biomedical engineering and holds both undergraduate and graduate degrees from Duke. And he is also alumni of this Venture for America program. So I think it's really great to know that Vinay actually grew up in several countries, having been born in India, lived in Singapore, Indonesia, and I met him back in high school when he was in Shanghai before he came to the US for college. So Vinay, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz. And like you mentioned, it's great to come full circle back from high school days and now being on your podcast. So I really appreciate you having me on.
I'm excited. You are incredibly innovative because we've talked a lot about in the past, like how you're grabbing different experiences from the data side to the striker days of what data means to you so that you can build your own company in healthcare. And as I come out with this new book, Digital MD, Revolutionizing the Future of Healthcare, I think it could really address the population that you want to target. So all the entrepreneurs out there that are trying to say, how do I build a business case? Where do I go? Your company looks at the claim side and understands where markets can be penetrated. And by the way, my book has 5 stakeholders. It's the 5 Ps: payers, providers, patients, policymakers, and pioneers. And you're the pioneer. So I'm really excited to have you on. So before we dive in, is there anything that you want to add about the founding story behind Bonfire Analytics and what motivated you to start it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely excited to get into the weeds of the data and what we're doing. But yeah, just as a precursor, I think you did a great job kind of summarizing my personal background. But so professionally, I've always been passionate about health tech. Like you mentioned, I got my degrees in mechanical biomedical engineering, worked at Stryker, and then pivoted to early growth stage digital health. In that process, I found that selling into the healthcare space is actually incredibly challenging. Whether you're selling to providers or plans, oftentimes you have sales and commercial teams that just don't have the foundational data to build their target markets, to understand how to reach their target patient populations and how they should go about building a qualified top of pipeline. And so that's something that I personally faced. And I saw so many sales reps doing that spray and pray approach that unfortunately has become the norm, where you send 1,000 emails to 1,000 physicians, you get 10 responses in one meeting. Always felt like there was a lot of efficiency that can be added to that. And so that was my personal kind of frustration turned inspiration to start Bonfire. And as it happens, whenever you want to start a company, it has to be with the right person as well as the right opportunities. As it turned out, my co-founder, he's actually a really good friend of mine from school. Both of us went to Duke together. He went into the data science world after both of us were engineers. He worked at several Silicon Valley startups as a data scientist, and then most recently, before Bonfire, worked at SoFi, where he built out their AI and ML. So when the two of us were reconnecting on a side project, my obviously passion with healthcare really blended well with his passion for data and what AI ML can do. And he had a lot of experience doing things like predictive lead scoring, making sense of disparate data sets in the fintech world, and had an interest in healthcare. And then I, on the other hand, had a lot of interest, obviously, on the data side, knowing that there's a gap there. So between the two of us, we really had a shared vision for what we're building at Bonfire Analytics, which is that AI-driven sales intelligence platform. And so there's a lot of obviously the data science and the AI that goes behind it, but ultimately it's for the commercial use case. So it's been exciting to see where we are now, and happy to share more details about how our platform works. But just thought that voiceover on how we got started would be helpful.
That's great. I think a lot of people are always wondering what the origin story is. So definitely helpful. One thing that we do right now at Everly Health for my day job is that we look at lab data and we try to figure out where are lab deserts. So for example, if we wanted to work with you, how would you talk about the data and how would you structure the data to help us understand where we should target or what are the needs across our demographic or patient population?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a few stats that come to mind. I think one that is out there, the 70% of today's medical decisions depend on lab tests, showing that this is a really plays an important role in today's healthcare system. And in fact, in our data on a high level actually confirms that GoodRx did a study where it showed
Mm.
that over 80% of US counties have at least one healthcare desert as defined by a high drive time radius to primary care providers, hospitals, labs, and or pharmacies. Now, this applies
Yes.
to over 120 million people. So obviously, it's a huge systemic gap for a large part of the population where things like routine checkups, screenings, and things that should be really done up the pipeline of someone's care journey doesn't
Mhm.
get done. And so I think that's where when we look at lab deserts, I know from my understanding of what Everly does, which is helping essentially with at-home testing and shipping out diagnostic kits for people to be able to, in the convenience of their own home, get checked up for certain types of conditions, understanding where are there care gaps as far as access to labs, as well as where are there potentially high risk populations based on certain social determinants of health barriers they might have, where are there maybe poor clinical outcomes that could have really
Mhm.
been alleviated by, again, having preventative screening or diagnostic testing earlier through that person's care journey. I think those are insights that
Hmm.
we can provide through our data. And so that's just to give a kind of a high level kind of view of what is possible with the data and how it can actually help get through to the patients who might need this kind of service the most.
This is really interesting. So could you explain some of the ways that you manage claims data? Like what data are you
Yeah.
pulling? You can pull anything from Facebook
Yeah.
data on an individual to the claim side, right? On what's getting billed to healthcare, even portal data, for example, Epic or EMR data. So what data are you pulling that makes Bonfire different?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can talk about our kind of data set as a whole, and then how
Mm,
we're positioned differently than what you might see out there in the market today. So, on a high level, our data set is comprehensive across a few different buckets. So,
mm,
the first is population health, which includes things like demographic, disease state, social risk factors, social determinants of health. So, this gets into a lot of things around health equity, which you and I have talked about before.
mm,
Second bucket is provider. So provider and plan actually. So we have a full directory of every single provider in the country. So every physician group, clinic, hospital, health system. And what was actually surprising to me is that source of truth as a healthcare directory, unfortunately, still doesn't really exist or is not yet
mm,
mainstream. So that alone has standalone value. And we've done that cataloging both providers and plans. And the third bucket, which you mentioned, which I'm most excited by, is our coverage of medical and prescription claims, where we have over
mm,
300 million lives worth of all payer claims across Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, commercial.
mm,
And this really allows us to look at patient level granularity as far as who is getting diagnosed with what condition, what
mm,
medical procedures are being performed by which provider, being billed to which payer. And then we also have pre and post adjudicated claims. So both what was submitted and what was ultimately reimbursed for. And so this is data that, in my experience at least, with health tech, there's really not much visibility or access for a lot of companies to use this data in a meaningful way. So, what makes us different in getting into our positioning is we don't resell the data because we know this is obviously, there's a lot of value in just having the data, but a lot of times companies don't have the bandwidth, the resources to actually make sense of the data, extract claims trends, extract population provider trends that are meaningful from a commercial perspective. So that's
mm.
where we come in with our kind of AI ML model, where we take time to understand our customers, who are typically like medical device companies, digital health companies, biotech pharma companies. Who are they selling to? What is their ideal customer profile? And then from that, our AI ML model is able to actually train based on their current kind of historic data and who they're selling to actually build actionable sales insights. So we save
Mm.
time for commercial teams to not have to invest into data science. We take that out of the equation so that ultimately it's just like hey, here's your target market. Here's who you should be reaching out to. Here's how to get through the right patient populations, providers, plans. So we try to make it really
That's
simple
great.
for the end customer.
This is awesome because I think on this podcast, you're a pioneer, but I feel like you're a great spokesperson and a support for future pioneers. I would love to understand two of the data sets that you mentioned are very interesting. Population health, sometimes people can pull and it's more general, but the second and the third, the second you mentioned, which is the focus on provider data. which doctors are doing which type of more procedures. And if it's a medical device company or others that are saying, hey, we want to switch these into this new latest and greatest gold standard technology or innovation, that's one way where they can look. They could say, this doctor is doing a lot of X type of procedures. That I would love to hear a little bit more about why certain companies come to you for that. And then the second piece about, would love to understand a bit more about the claim side. So then you can probably help a company, let's say they're smoking cessation and they want to go after Medicare, but they're also thinking Medicaid, and they realize actually Medicaid claims data shows there's a lot more work on smoking cessation work. So then they should be able to go after a certain population or a certain state. Wouldn't that be interesting? And it sounds like you could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm happy to maybe give a use case. I think that oftentimes,
Yes.
puts into perspective like how does this bonfire work in action. So to your point about smoking cessation, I was actually going to an example about, let's say, a medical device companies in the asthma COPD space, and
Okay.
we've seen this before. So a medical device company, let's say, has a spirometer that can help patients who have, asthma COPD. We've had some of those companies come to us and say, look, we actually don't know who to reach out to because
Mm,
we're not sure where are there higher levels of patient populations that have asthma or COPD? Where are there claims being submitted for those diagnoses, for those procedures that would make sense for us, right? And which are those prescribers, those physicians at the end of the day that we should
mm,
be focusing on? And right now, like I mentioned, the status quo is spray and pray. If we find a pulmonologist somewhere, we're going to reach out to them. But there's no stratification as far as what makes someone a kind of a qualified opportunity versus someone that may not need what this product is because let's say they already have something in place. So we are
mm,
able to come in and say, okay, look, through our data, we're able to unpack which are the target markets, so states, MSA, CSA, where we see higher levels of patients that have asthma, COPD, other associated conditions, comorbidities at the geographic level. And then we can zoom into, okay, now which providers, physician groups, hospitals are actually seeing higher levels of claims and actually are losing money because of, let's say, poor clinical outcomes. And that's where we can then provide those insights for them to stratify their target list appropriately. And then that's when they see a lot of impact on their own kind of commercial strategy and being able to generate more revenue and ultimately get the product into the hands of the provider and the patient faster. And
mm.
maybe that goes back to our mission, which is, ultimately, like, we want to enable health tech companies to do what they do best, and that'll ultimately hopefully have a positive impact on patient lives because we're accelerating the time it takes to have a solution and get it in the hands of a patient for them to ultimately have a better clinical outcome or overall health. So
That is
hope
great.
that's helpful as a
That
kind of
is.
background. Yeah.
That's very helpful. And so you can not only get provider data and streamline some of the ways that they're going after certain types of not only clinicians, but markets. But are you also looking at, let's say, the claim side? So understanding both for the provider claims, but also on certain types of, you said, payers, and thinking through which kind of state, where are the concentrated disease states that are more pertinent or more interesting than others? Can you talk a bit about that too, to focus regionally?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question because I think regional focuses, especially on the plan side, I know from experience, I know that's obviously key and critical. And there's so much interesting overlap between provider payer relationships. And now you
Hmm.
also have things like vertically integrated health systems where
Hmm.
there's a payer that's in-house with the healthcare provider. So yes, to answer your question, our claims data, the type of granularity we have is down to the patient level. And I do want to say, as a just a quick disclaimer, we try to de-identify all our data. It's HIPAA compliant. While we can link it to an individual, it's not able to be re-identified. So I just wanted to say that up front. The patient level granularity, that claim, we actually are able to say who ultimately administered the claim, for what cost, and then which specific payer actually reimbursed for that claim. And so that's that kind of source of truth for any given diagnosis or condition that we can follow all the way back to the provider and tie it to the payer. And now we understand which payers are reimbursing what amounts for certain types of conditions, what's
Hmm.
a fair market value for certain types of procedures and conditions in a given market. And that allows for, again, better commercial strategy in terms of understanding, okay, we know that the commercial plans in this area are likely stand to gain a lot from having this medical device that can ultimately save a lot of downstream costs on the patient outcome. And
Mm.
that allows for, again, better targeting both on the provider and the plan side.
That is really great. Did you know that improving preventive care can significantly impact your health plan star ratings? Everly Health Solutions is the leader in at home testing for health plans. Their convenient, member centric approach has helped plans achieve industry leading results. In just 1 year, Everly Health Solutions helped a multi state Medicare group improve 15 of their plans by at least 1 star. That's a win for members, providers, and the plans themselves. Learn how Everly Health Solutions can elevate your health plan at everlyhealthsolutions.com. I'd like to take this in a little interesting, different position and angle on when you're looking ahead with all this great data. How do you see then combining the data with artificial intelligence evolving in the healthcare industry? What are the most exciting development areas? And particular for you, how are you leveraging AI in your workflow and in your build of what you're doing?
For sure. Maybe I'll touch on what's exciting for me, which I think is
Yeah.
also similar to what's exciting for you, is preventative healthcare. I do see that that's a huge trend that now I really hope continues to take off because we have lots of exciting digital tools, wearables, and so many tech-enabled services platforms that are enabling populations to ultimately take control of their own health and ones that are high risk to be able to stay healthy. And I think this again goes back to what Everly does too, right? Which is being able to have testing and screening to make sure that certain populations are able to stay healthy and are getting checked up routinely when they are supposed to, and again avoid like an ER visit down the line. And I think that trend is something that's super exciting for me as I see health tech continue to grow and evolve.
Mm.
For us, I will say when we say AI, I do know it's used as a buzzword these days, but
Yeah.
I think I should probably clarify for what we do, it's a little bit more on the back end where we're using different types of AI ML models, clustering, regression, and obviously I won't get too technical there, but these help us surface those right types of insights. So maybe like an example for Everly, like being able to understand where are there tests being done to a high level, but then where are there tests that are not being done that should be an area of focus. That's an exclusionary
Mm.
claims trend that can be surfaced via our AI/ML with the right training, right? So that's something we are able to do with heuristics, with
Mm.
customer data. So that's where we utilize AI. So it's a little bit more, I would say, geared towards the machine learning side of things rather than a chat GPT type of like generative AI. So I hope that also clarifies like our use of AI and where we're going. Ultimately, we want this to be useful for the end user. And this is something that we've found that really does move the needle from a commercial perspective.
Yes. I think it could be so interesting where you're like, your AI comes through, if you're targeting a bunch of physicians and you know what their LinkedIn profile says, where they live, or which conferences they're attending, you can make it hyper focused in addition to what language they like or what jargon they usually speak to, or especially if you're trying to do a sales call, a sales pitch. And on top of that, I find it so interesting too. The second area I'd love to understand too is, are you ever going into like intervention? So when you're
Mm.
selling, most payers, providers, they want to know if they implement this new solution, what is the X dollar savings or what is the extra revenue that they're generating and whatnot.
Yeah.
So, could you then almost extrapolate and say, with this new intervention, with this new device, you can code better, you can either save costs or build more? And so, I wonder at some point if you can support your startups to do that too.
Yes, and it's funny that you bring that up. We actually had several conversations just in the last month exactly about this,
Hmm.
which is I think you're hinting at like business case development for a health
Yes.
tech company, and that's absolutely an insight that we've seen already bring value to our current customers, and we're showing that same thing as a value proposition to our prospective customers, which is, hey, look,
Hmm.
you likely don't have the data at your fingertips about this given provider or payer that you're selling to. What if you had all of that up front and you could project what the ROI would be, right? Whether it's cost savings, whether it's better clinical outcomes, we're able to do that kind of math and adding on our data
Hmm.
and our insights. That makes it a lot more compelling for a provider payer to ultimately adopt a solution, right? If they knew that this is a guaranteed savings based on hard data that we already have access to. So
Yes.
definitely exciting for us to lean into that.
That's great. So, Vinay, it's been an absolute pleasure. I think just exploring everything within data and all the things that you're doing to support companies. I really appreciate it at the time. And I also want to say that before we wrap up, we always do our hot takes for the 5 key questions. Are you ready to go through them? You already know them. So excited to hear your best advice to start.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited for this part of the conversation too. So, best advice I would say is having a bias for action. So that's something as an entrepreneur, I think it's we sometimes tend to live in our own heads, and I've tried to force myself to say, look, let's just test it out, let's try it. And I think that's where you get into things like product market fit, viability, and so having that
Mm,
bias for action. It actually came from a book I read about called Design Your Life by the Stanford D School.
I've read
Um,
it. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so I think that principle is really a great one, especially for entrepreneurs, founders. Favorite business quote: innovation is rewarded, execution is worshipped. And I think also something that really resonates with me, I think when I was a lot younger, I used to feel like having a good idea is what it really took to build a good company or a startup. But ultimately, like ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about how you actually built execution with a strong team, a strong
Mm-hmm.
kind of vision, and then obviously the day in and the day out. So that's something that really stuck with me as well. Yeah, and then going down
Mm,
the list, hardest challenge and how I overcame it, or as a team we overcame it. This is actually from recent memory. It's actually fundraising. So we did close a
mm-hmm.
recent venture round, and I would say that was probably one of the more difficult things in this kind of environment to have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the way that we were able to overcome it as a team here was being able to follow a process. That's something our accelerator that we went through really instilled in us is just stick to the process. This is a tried and tested kind of model that's worked for a lot of founders and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately did work out for us. The other thing was perseverance. I think it's what they say is for especially for first time founders, you get to 40 no's before you get your first yes. And I think that honestly did hold true in a lot of ways, but just having that mental fortitude and perseverance. And then finally just listening to advice from other founders who've done it before, and including yourself, by the way, is just being able to have open ears to understand like how did people navigate it before you, and then taking that into your own process here. And then the last one, I know we did touch on what's most exciting about healthcare innovation. I think preventative healthcare, like I mentioned. The last one is if I could have any superpower, what it would be. This is a funny one because I think it still ended up coming back to healthcare. I would say super healing. If I could heal others around me physically, mentally,
Mm,
emotionally, and myself, that would be a cool superpower to have.
I love that. And knowing you, I truly believe that about you. Vinay, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciated. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and for the impactful work that you're doing at Bonfire. So, listeners, to learn more about Bonfire Analytics, follow them on LinkedIn and visit their website at www.bonfireanalytics.com, where you can also get in touch with their team directly. And we'll link both in the show notes. We hope today's conversation has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore further. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep on innovating. Did you know that improving preventive care can significantly impact your health plan star ratings? Everly Health Solutions is the leader in at-home testing for health plans. Their convenient, member-centric approach has helped plans achieve industry-leading results. In just 1 year, Everly Health Solutions helped a multi-state Medicare group improve 15 of their plans by at least 1 star. That's a win for members, providers, and the plans themselves. Learn how Everly Health Solutions can elevate your health plan at everlyhealthsolutions.com.